Councilmember Barry.
Here.
Councilmember Hegestad is absent. Councilmember Weir.
Here.
Councilmember Christus.
Here.
Vice Mayor Goodman.
Present.
Mayor Worsborn.
Present. Thank you very much. 2 is workshop items. 2A, council to receive a summary of the 2025 water and wastewater rate study and recommendations. We have about an hour for it. Mr. Terry Lowe, you're going to be presenting.
That's great. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. Jared and I will tag team this presentation here. This is a summary of our voyage related to our present rate model and study. But I want to introduce to my left is Mr. Jim Subject, who was the chair of the Water Rates Committee that this body stood up in July. And we'll go into the work that we did with the committee to get to the recommendations that we will present tonight. So, talk a little bit about, again, timeline of how we got to this point. We'll discuss some background points, what drives the rates. Jared will talk about some of our financial requirements, our policies, and then we'll dive into the actual recommendations themselves. So, as I started off saying, 6-8 months ago or so, the Water Rates Committee was stood up in the first part of July, and since that time we had several meetings with the committee, and we went and took a deep dive into each utility, each component of the utilities. I'll touch a little bit about that tonight. We looked at comparisons, how we compared to other utilities, similar size, other cities, similar size and larger size. And then ultimately, some recommendations were made, and on October 9th, the committee voted in favor of the rate cycle, restructure, as well as the fees associated with it. Since that time, we took the show on the road, so to speak. In October, we launched Eye on Buckeye, and then also a social media campaign, as well as other outreach. In November, we had outreach meetings, open house style, in the community, in the festival, and here downtown, as well as Sundance. We received feedback from the community. In December, we had also we had some meetings with our HOAs, specifically narrowing the discussion more in terms of how the landscape proposed rates would go towards what they would need to pay for, and our approach to, I'll talk a little bit more about it in the presentation, but how the proposed rates for landscaping were now compared to what we were proposing. And then just look into the future a little bit. So tonight we'll talk about it here with you. February 3rd, we're being planned to take it back to council for a notice of intent, which will start a 60-day public comment period with a adoption in the first part of April, and then a go live of the new rates in May. So a little bit of background. We met with the Water Rates Committee. The committee was made up of members of each district as well as one at large, and we started right at the 100,000 foot level and talked about what does water and wastewater within the city of Buckeye mean. And so, as you're aware, there's 3 water utilities within the city of Buckeye. There's City of Buckeye, there's AZ Water, and there's EPCOR. EPCOR provides water and wastewater to a small pocket of the city, and then AZ Water provides water to that area in yellow, but their customers are also our customers in terms of wastewater. And the rest of the city in blue, and also areas that are not currently developed, are City of Buckeye customers either in water and sewer, or sewer alone. So then we brought it down a little bit and broke the utilities down into manageable chunks, so to speak. And we looked at really what drives the costs, and really that revolves around each of our assets. And so we started with, we're a groundwater sourced utility. We started with the cost of withdrawing the water. What are the different steps along the water's journey to become drinkable, and eventually to each of our homes and businesses. And so we looked at each component: the treatment, pumping, storage, reservoirs. What drives those areas? Assets dictate the cost of personnel, the cost of of asset management. They also dictate the commodities associated with the treatment, chemicals, electricity, such things like that. So this is the flow of water from raw water to our faucets, and then on the flip side, what do we do with the water after it gets cleaned, or after it gets used? It gets flushed, sent into the wastewater stream, and we went into deep dive of each component of what it takes to recover that water from the wastewater stream. What does it mean to have to dispose of the solids that are left over, and then what does it take to send that water to benefited uses such as golf courses, farms, HOA landscaping. We have a couple of those. No processed water at the present time, but we do intend to potentially have that available when there's enough. So when we look at City of Buckeye, we also looked at kind of what makes us different. And so we did some comparisons, specifically with ones that are in similar size. And so if you look at these utilities, they each produce about the same amount of water. They're all groundwater sourced. This is Goodyear's groundwater component. They do have a surface water component as well. But this is their groundwater component. When you look at it, we talked about assets on the other slides. When we look at it, we all produce about the same amount of water. But then what it takes to produce that amount of water is, each one is a little bit different in the sense that what is the amount of assets? And assets drive the cost. And so if you can just taking a couple line items out of there, Goodyear to produce 3.5 billion gallons has 14 wells, we have 33. We've got a larger service area than all of these cities. We've got, so which means more distribution pipe, more collections pipe, those types of things. Another big standout is the number of booster pumps. We are spread out. Our elevations vary greatly depending on where you are in the cities. We've got more booster pumps associated with it. But with that, we are still actually very comparable to some of those cities, and we're less than Goodyear in some respects. We're close to Surprise in some respects. But the assets drive the cost, and that is really why we're here. So when we look again, cost drivers, increase in costs. In 2020, rates were, we had an addition to our rates, which was a $3.05 repair and replace fee that went on per bill, but the rates themselves did not change since 2013, 2012, 2013 area there. Water portfolio is something that is becoming an increasing need that we've got. The model right now is $33.7 million over 5 years or 4 years?
That's 4 years.
Over the next 4 years we're projecting. In the past, we hadn't put a lot of effort into our portfolio, but as we grow, the need to have a strong water portfolio is just as important as having a strong asset management program. And asset management is probably the biggest driver of rates. The city has approximately $1.2 billion worth of assets. Replacement value of those assets, rule of thumb, to maintain proper working orders, you want to run about 2%. Reinvestment back into those assets there. And so with that, we're targeting that, but certainly not something we are going after immediately. As you'll see, we're looking at about a 1% increase, 1% reinvestments, just to get us closer to where we need to be to have proper reinvestment. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question on that last one? The utility cost drivers, the increasing costs, the rates that have been adjusted, are you referring to the electric utility rates that were adjusted in 2020, or is that our rates that had been adjusted in 2020?
That would have been, well, in this respect, it's our rates, but really the adjustment was the addition of the $3.05 R&R component.
Not the resource fee?
No, as I recall, that was the same.
Yeah, correct. What we're talking about there is that while we've had increasing costs, like the items that you're talking about, we haven't adjusted our rates since January of 2020.
Okay, so it's kind of what I finished on the last slide is our assets. The city's grown. The number of assets in our portfolio has also grown, and so you can see our water water assets went to about from $450 million to over $700 million worth of replacement. Wastewater, similar growth trajectory, a little under $400 million to over $450 million value of our assets there. So when we talk about asset management, this is where, again, we're targeting a 2% value, reinvestment value. However, we have not been keeping up with that. The wastewater number looks a little low there, but actually the goal is to have the replacement within our operating budget. Wastewater has had some work done on its assets, but under the capital budget as well. And so I want to make sure to point that out. Capital is also acting as a little bit as asset management. The goal would be to make sure everything is inside of our operating budget, and that becomes an ongoing expense as we grow and as our asset values and quantity of our assets goes up. The model right now, as we target this first cycle, targets about a 1% replacement. No, just graphically, this is sort of where we are and where we need to be, and our recommendation tonight will put us in 2029 at the point we want to be at 1%. Eventually, again, future years, we'll head towards that 2%.
This slide real quick, just if you notice the water starts off at a little better place at the beginning of the model, so less steep slope, so it causes pressure on our need for more revenue. But when you look at the wastewater, we're going from a place where it's largely being funded from capital right now, and we're trying to get it into our operating budget. Much more aggressive slope in order to get to that 1% in fiscal year 2029. So when we're talking about the rates later, more pressure coming from the asset management issue on the wastewater side than on the water side. The water side, as we mentioned, we're trying to put some money away for some of the water portfolio needs. So you're getting pressure from the water portfolio on the water side. You're getting pressure to increase our repair budgets for this asset management. So the city has a series of financial policies that govern how we budget, how we issue debt, among other things. We also have 5 specific policies that pertain to our enterprise funds. And we're going over all of those tonight. That's part of this process. So the first thing is that we are supposed to complete a study every 5 years. The last study, as you saw, was the last time we had the rates back in 2020. So we're sitting here 6 years later. The study was largely completed last spring. However, we did need to go out. We needed to form the Citizens Committee. We needed to go out and do outreach. So while we're behind, we feel like the efforts we've made in the last year make this a much better plan. We have adjusted based on the input that we've been getting both from the public and from the community. Second, the rate adjustments must be based on a 5-year model. So the information I'm going to show you shows a 5-year outlook. The model actually extends out 8 years to give us an idea. We don't want to just make a decision to get out to that 5 years, and if something big happens in year 6, we want to be prepared for that. So it goes out 8 years. 3 specific things that we're looking at. First, the fees should recover the operating cost. And that includes, specifically, it states that it includes maintenance repair budgets. So the things that we just talked about with the asset management, that should be included in our operating budgets and covered by the fees that we're talking about tonight. Second, we have a reserve policy, so we should have reserved fund balance of 17% of our operating revenues. And finally, our debt coverage ratio should be at a minimum of 1.2 times. What that means is the free or additional operating revenues that we have over our operating expenses, that amount should be 1.2 times what our debt service payment is. So as we get more debt, that ratio begins to come down. We have to recover that with additional fees. And we'll look at some graphs for each one of these. So we'll start by looking at the idea of fees covering our operating costs. You can see what this slide is showing is that each, the water, which is on our left, and the wastewater on the right, each have a surplus, an operating surplus. So the operating revenues exceed the operating expenses in both of those funds, which means we meet our requirements for the policy. What you will notice, though, is that both of them drop from fiscal year 28 to 29 in the model that we have. Both of them are going to be issuing debt in the end of fiscal year 28, which then is a larger debt service payment in 29. So you're seeing that as we issue that debt, our operating surplus diminishes quite a bit. So as part of our recommendations, you're going to see that we're recommending as staff that we do a 4-year rate plan instead of a 5-year that had been discussed originally with our committee. And the reason why is because we look at that fiscal year 29 as a very important year. That's year 4. At that point, we will have issued that debt and we'll know if that expense exists and whether or not we need to do additional action in 2030. But we don't feel like we should wait an extra year in 2030 because the debt that gets issued in 28 will have a very large impact on what's going on with respect to our fees covering our operating costs. Next up, the reserves, 17% of our operating revenue. So what you're looking at here in the blue is the fund balance in each of the water and wastewater funds. The orange line you see down below is that 17% of operating revenue threshold. So as our revenues increase, that reserve also increases. So you can see we start at 26, both of them well above the requirement for the 17% reserve. And this model, we spend that cash down. Our target is to get to that threshold. So on the water side, we're spending that money down. Most of that is, well, you have cash funded capital, you have some asset replacement that we're doing through CIP, but the big thing is that water portfolio of dollars that we're setting aside. So that $33.4 million is essentially coming out of that fund balance for those first through 2029. On the right side, you're seeing the effects of being more aggressive at our repair budget. So we're having to use more cash to fund CIP and to fund asset replacement, but essentially you're seeing that. And every rate model that you do, this is what the graph looks like. You take your fund balance, you spend that fund balance over the next 5 years down to your reserve. So it's not strange that the graph looks like this. The speed at which the water drops with the investments in the water portfolio may be a little concerning. Again, why we're saying let's do a 4-year rate model or 4-year rate plan rather than a 5-year rate plan.
And Jared, if you don't have the fund balance existing that we have right now, what does that rate look like? Or I guess the alternative is you don't do the improvements that are necessary, or you have to borrow for those improvements.
So the fund balance does a couple things. One, you would either end up having to borrow more. The other thing is this helps act as a shock absorber for us. So if we see spikes, so for instance, water can be somewhat seasonal and dependent on the weather. So if you have a year where maybe there's heavy rain, you have less water use, that's going to affect our revenues. So having some of this fund balance in place allows us to kind of weather that storm until we can get to the next year. So the fund balance acts as a shock absorber for us. And one of the things we'll talk about in our recommendations is this idea of gradualism, that we want to have consistent rate changes. We don't want to have spikes. So if you don't have fund balance and something big happens, you might have to go and do a large rate change immediately because you're gonna fall below your threshold. But having that fund balance gives you more time to plan those things out.
And that's growing the orange line up to have the right size fund balance. The blue line where it's at the beginning of that, if we didn't have that, it would be either a more significant orange line increase or a more significant increase in the overall rates, so that we end up with that orange line.
That is correct. If we didn't have that fund balance, we would have to go more aggressively probably with rate increases. The other side of that is asset and repair budgets. Maybe we can't do the things that we want to do with our repair budget. So those would be the two things that you'd be playing with. Either you wouldn't spend money on things that we're saying you need to, or you would have to increase the rates.
Okay. Thank
The final slide shows the debt service coverage ratios, and you see again, the orange line is the 1.2. That is what the policy says. It's also common practice in industry to get good rates, you have to be over 1.2 times coverage ratio. Otherwise, you're essentially seen as junk bonds below that, and your rates are tremendously higher. So there's good reason to try to keep that over 1.2, because otherwise that will negatively impact how much interest we have to pay and drive up our expenses. So in both cases, you can see that we are above the 1.2. However, after we issue debt in 2028, both of the funds drop closer to that 1.2 threshold. Both of them drop below 1.3. This is something that we manage ongoing as we're planning our debt issuance, but certainly an important policy to be looking at as well. Last item we'll talk about on the expenditure side of the global connection fee. So back in 2016, the city's water utility purchased the global water service area. And as part of that deal, there's a $3,000 payment that is made to Global for each connection that is made in the old service area. It was anticipated that we would pass these costs on. So when somebody comes for a connection, we would charge them $3,000 and pass that through to Global. What we found, and this is paid by the water utility, and as part of this model, it is continuing to be paid as part of the water utility. The model includes $3 million of annual expenses, in line with what you're seeing here on the graph on the right. The big thing you'll notice kind of when we're talking about the pressures on expenditures, so you can see the last time we were discussing rate changes back in 2020, you had an amount that was about $300,000 a year we were paying in these global connection fees. That has increased up close to $3 million. We've found that there are many developers that had agreements in place with Global Water before they came on board with the city that said that they already had contributed to infrastructure. So we have not been able to charge them. Going forward, we will increase our efforts and be aggressive at collecting that collection fee to pass that through. However, to be conservative in this model, we're showing that we have $3 million of expenses and about $80,000 of annual revenue. So after we put everything into the model and we crunch through all of those policies and make sure that we're meeting all of those, we come to the end with an annual rate revenue increase necessary on the water side each year for 26, 27, 28, and 29 of 4.25%. And on the wastewater, 7% for each year, 26, 27, 28, and 29. Next, we'll get into the recommendations, and these are recommendations that were discussed with the Citizens Water Committee as well. And there's three main things that we're looking at. So gradualism, I talked a little bit about this. Avoiding rate shocks. So rate changes are going to be steady and incremental. That's why the recommendation is that we have essentially the same percentage rate increase each year. We don't want to see a large spike in any one year. We could increase everything right now by 12%. However, that is a large amount for people to swallow at one time. So gradualism says we're going to do this over time with steady incremental increases. Next, when the Water Rate Committee was discussing and came up with a recommendation, they were looking at a 5-year rate plan. That was the recommendation. However, staff, with some of the other information that we have, are recommending a 4-year plan. Again, because of when we see that drop in our operating surpluses in both of those funds declining, we see that the fund balance, especially on the water side, is going really close to that reserve amount. And then with both of them dropping below 1.3 on their debt service coverage ratios, our recommendation is that we do a 4-year plan to coincide with those events. Finally, we have new rate structures. We're looking to incentivize conservation with some of the tiering that we're doing on the rates. And then also we're looking at the fairness to customers. And I have a slide here that shows on the left the wastewater usage. So this is the billed usage that we have for our commercial and our residential customers. You can see that the residential customers make about 81% of the usage. On the right side, you see the revenue. So today, residential customers make up about 90% of the revenue. So as part of what we're doing with these rate recommendations and the changes we're making, we're looking to bring that closer to an 85% residential, 15% commercial to make this graph a little bit more in line. So on the water side, for instance, the residential customers make up about 62% of the usage, and they pay 63% of the revenue, which is appropriate considering just the number of accounts that is there. It's appropriate that maybe it's a percent or two higher, but having a spread of 9% is a little bit steeper than we'd like to see. So we're looking to bring this down to about 85% on the residential side and 15% on the commercial side. And with that, we'll have Terry start crunching through some numbers for you.
Thanks, Jared. And so, next few slides, we'll talk about the proposed structure as well as the proposed new rates within that structure that we looked at. So, on the slide before you here is water. In the red are the adjustments to the structure from what we have now to what we're proposing. When it comes to base rates for water, we added a 3/4 inch meter because we do have some 3/4 inch legacy meters still within the city. We adjusted slightly the residential tiered usage structure, but the biggest change I would say is that from the commercial side of things, we had a flat usage fee for commercial regardless of how much water you use, whether you use 1 drop or 1,000,000 drops, it was the same amount, which is sort of contrary to a lot of the cities, as well as it doesn't necessarily encourage conservation. And so we're proposing the following tiered structure on commercial usage, and I'll show you how that usage is with our current customers. And then additional changes within our landscape usage rate. Our prior structure had a 0 to 10,000 gallons a month and then 10,000 gallons a month and greater, and we found that to be a little bit restrictive and limiting in a sense that nearly not any customers from a landscape usage standpoint were in the 0 to 10,000, and so most were paying a higher tiered rate. When we looked at the quantity of our customers, a good percentage of them were actually in that 0 to 50,000, and then the smaller percentages in the larger rate. It's also very, very indicative of other municipalities when talking about landscape usage rates. Non-potable water was per 1,000 gallons, and it stayed per 1,000 gallons. So for wastewater, again, the customers we changed the base rates to be per meter size, and then from the residential standpoint, we did have a usage rate of residential. What we did is we worked into the rate for residential to be a flat fee regardless of usage, because most of our residential customers stayed within a very narrow band of their usage, and we said we'd just keep it at a flat rate. Other cities have a similar structure. Commercial had stayed with a per 1,000 gallon. We just adjusted that to accommodate the cost recoveries that are needed. So when we look at the base rates for water, on the left-hand side in blue is our current rate structure. As you can see, residential customers, regardless of meter size, paid exactly the same amount. On commercial, it was somewhat of a tiered approach, although it was not structured equally across the board. Landscaping base rates were different. The way we look at it is that a water meter is a water meter. The larger the meter, the more water you can push through it, and therefore the higher the cost of having that larger meter. And so our proposed rates moving forward, as you can see, is that the 3/4 inch base rate actually goes down slightly. Something to note is that in all of those bills is that flat $3.05 repair and replacement fee. That we took that out because as we work towards a stronger, more robust asset management program, that was worked back into the individual rates, both on the base as well as the volumetric usage side. And so again, most of our customers are on the residential side in the 3/4 and 1 inch, and you can see that they actually go down for the first year, and then again steadily, as Jared mentioned, steadily go up year over year, matching that 4 1/4 increase. For usage, residential rates again go up slightly year over year, but we're talking less than $1, and then averaging out about 20 cents per year. Most of our bills, those percentages you see in parentheses, are the number of bills. So 98.5% of all of our bills fall in that, on the residential side, fall in that 0 to 6,000 gallons a month. The other higher ones are, probably anomalies that occur for either larger homes or someone filled a pool or something like that throughout the year. Commercial, again, that's that new structure we're proposing. Our current rates, so to speak, right now are flat $8.08, regardless of how much water is being used. Putting our new structure in place, our rates are as follows. But again, most of our 50% of our bills on the commercial side are in that 0 to 10,000 gallon usage. There are some, of course, that use more water depending on their business, and so they'll fall into the higher rate category. Potable landscape, this one as well. The current rate is under the 0 to 10,000 gallon and 10,000 gallon and above. So the rates don't necessarily apples to apples, but what we can show is that if you're in that 75% that are using less than 50,000 gallons a month, you're paying very close to what you were paying for under the 0 to 10. And since you don't have that higher tier, you're actually paying less overall. But our proposed rate structure, again, 25% of those customers are in the higher 50,000 gallon a month club. Of that 25%, about 40% of that 25 stops at 150,000 gallons a month. It's really the large HOAs that utilize a lot more water than that. Part of the reasoning for adjusting this is we recognize that landscaping is primarily our HOAs, and what happens with the HOAs is the HOAs they'll pay this because the community landscaping demands for it, and you want to keep the community to a certain standard, but in the end it rolls back down to each resident to pay those HOA bills. And so we wanted to recognize that the HOA bills are what will look at this and pay for this, and therefore we wanted to put it in a position where it's not going to be one where we're hitting our residents twice. Non-potable landscape usage went up slightly to just for the cost of service itself, but still a flat usage rate there. So wastewater, as I mentioned, the wastewater residential side of things, we used to have, or we currently have, I should say, a base rate plus a $2 per 1,000 gallon usage. Our goal was to eliminate that usage rate and just roll it into a single flat fee for residential customers. Again, 99.595 of our customers are in that less than 1 inch meter. So we adjusted the cost of service and zeroed out included a known volume of residential water usage. So if there's times where you flush more, you don't have to worry about the bill going up there. And on the commercial side of things, again, we adjusted the meter size to equivalent to the rate itself, and so our volumetric usage for wastewater goes up slightly in most cases, but then again we ride on that 7% increase year over year, and then again commercial usages goes up to about $5 from the $2.50, but that is adjusted from the cost of service. We are very much in line with our sister cities on our usage rate as well there.
So now we'll see what the impact is, and I apologize for the series of eye charts that we're putting in front of you. So what we'll start by saying is we can ignore 27, 28, and 29 only because we're looking at the percentage increase year over year. Each of those, the way this is designed, they're 4.25% on the water side, just like our revenue requirements are that we need 4.25% extra. Each of those is 4.25% over the prior year. The change you're seeing from our current to 26, though, that's the impact of the changes that we just went through on the rate design. So by changing the tiering structure, adding in different meter sizing that we're using for base rates, that type of, all of that you'll see in that percentage change current to 2026. So we'll start at the top where we have a residential meter. It's a 1-inch meter, 6,000 gallons of usage. You're gonna hear us mention that example a lot. So 1-inch, 6,000 gallons of water usage, 4,000 gallons of wastewater. That's kind of our average. So that's what we use. So you see a 4% increase for the average user on the water side. I didn't put an example of a 3/4 inch meter. However, for those that have 3/4 inch meters, you're actually going to see a decrease of about 1.6%, so around $1. So you can essentially say that those that have 3/4 inch meters are remaining more or less flat for the first year. Next you have a commercial, the next two are actually low water use commercial customers. So the first has a 1-inch meter, 15,000 gallons per month. The second is a 2-inch meter with 20,000 gallons a month. You're actually seeing a decrease on the water impact, the monthly impact for that first year, having to do with the tiering structure that we changed, and also changing the way that we're aligning the base rate based on your meter. We're aligning that across residential and commercial. So they're really seeing the bonus in that decrease in their base charge is what they're seeing. But you're seeing a decrease for the low water users. I also have a landscape example there. So for a smaller landscape meter that's only doing 20,000 gallons a month, they're actually going to see a decrease of about 31%. Next up, you have a high-end water user for landscape. So 500,000 gallons a month, an increase of about 6.8%. The non-potable is an increase of 25.5%. This is 150,000. This is kind of a typical non-potable user. Going up at 25%, but you can see the dollars are significantly different than what you see on the landscape meter or for a commercial meter. So the impact is about $170 per month for a user with a 2-inch meter and 150,000 gallons per month of non-potable use. Finally, you have a high-end user on the commercial side, 2-inch meter using 800,000 gallons a month. This is where you're seeing the effect of the tiering structure that we have and that goal of incentivizing conservation. So if you're a high-end water user, you're going to be hit with a large increase on your bill. So you're seeing an 89% increase for a commercial user that's a high user of water.
Let me ask a question on that. That's not landscape.
That is not landscape.
So it would not affect HOAs.
Correct. If you look 2 lines above that, we have a landscape meter that 500,000 gallons per month. You're seeing just under a 7% increase. Now, so that is a high use water meter. However, depending on the size of your HOA, you may have multiple of those in your HOA. However, 6.8% is what you should see as an increase year over year.
And the commercial, do we have any commercial users now using that much water?
Yeah, we do. And that's why we put that example up there. We obviously wanted to be transparent about what the impact of these rates are.
And are there many commercial users that have that amount of water use?
There's a few. I mean, we're talking car washes and things of that nature.
Okay.
Are in that ballpark there.
That's cool. I'm sorry.
That doesn't include their landscape. If it's a commercial operation, those are
It's
separate.
usually a separate meter.
So you'd have, the building
Small site.
uses the majority, if, let's say it is a car wash, separate, they typically don't have that much landscape around them, but if that was, okay. Okay, got it, right, yeah.
How about schools? Where do they fall in this?
Schools are in the commercial category. Councilman, their usage, I wish I had I wish I knew what their school usages would be, but they're usually have a couple meters. They'll have a landscape meter for their site. They'll have 1 inch or 2 inch meter for the building itself. School doesn't use all that much water over per square foot basis. It's usually just restrooms of that nature. A lot of our schools on the outside use either irrigation water or reclaim. We send some reclaim to the schools themselves, so they're on the non-potable side of things. I don't have any, I wish I had a number for them in school, but it's a good question. I can certainly get that for you.
I think the key thing is that if they're a high water user on the landscape side, have a separate landscape meter, then you're looking at the 6.8% increase. So you're not going to see a school using 500,000 gallons a month in the building. You would see a separate meter for the landscape, and you would see probably the high water use on that side, or as Terry mentioned, they use irrigation or they use non-potable water. Up next, we have the wastewater monthly impact, and first of all, you got the residential at the top there, and again, we're assuming 4,000 gallons per month of usage. We're going to be going to a flat fee now. You see a 7% increase on the residential side, and this is you see the next couple. These were the low water users on the water side, and they were seeing essentially a reduction in their bills. On the wastewater side, they're seeing an increase, and a large increase. And the reason for that is because of that item I talked about trying to push more of the percentage of the revenue towards the commercial side. So getting residential away from paying for 89% or 90% of the revenue and getting them to pay for 85%. So some of what you're seeing, a lot of what you're seeing is that shift, trying to get the commercial to pay for more of its share of the wastewater. We'll have a couple slides here that'll combine those two bills together. So those lower water use commercial customers, we'll combine those two things together so you can see what the overall impact on their bill will be. Again, at the bottom, you see a high-end commercial user. If you're using a lot of water, the expectation is you're using a lot of wastewater as well, and you're seeing, again, a large increase on the commercial high water user. You don't see landscape here because it's going out onto the ground and they're not flushing it down the toilet. So rate comparison, looking at other cities and where Buckeye stands. So currently our rates were right in the middle of this group. That includes Avondale, Peoria, Surprise, Glendale, Goodyear, and then also we have Liberty and Epcor showing on there. You see that the increase for the Buckeye, the recommendation going to just over $100 a month. We'll be looking more closely at what that bill impact is in a couple of slides, but just showing a comparison to other cities. Again, 1 inch meter, 6,000 gallons of usage, and 4,000 gallons of wastewater use. So here's the bill comparison of the current bill. On there you've got the water base and consumption. This is exactly how it looks on their bill. So essentially these are the lines that you see on the bill today. So the water base and consumption, the sewer base consumption. We also have the garbage and recycling showing up on this bill. An environmental fee of $5, that's going to remain. You see the repair and replacement fee that is currently being charged at $3.05. As Terry mentioned, we're not going to be charging that going forward. We're incorporating that as part of the overall water fees that we're charging. Sales tax on the services for water. And then the Arizona Water Quality Tax is based on how much water you use. So as we go through these examples, you're going to see that go up based on the usage that you have. The overall impact, about $6.62, a 5% overall increase in the monthly bill for the residential customer. So the commercial, this is one of the lower water users, 1-inch meter, 15,000 gallons of usage. You don't see a sanitation garbage recycling on this one. The overall increase, about $25 a month, just under 7% impact there. You have a 2-inch meter, 20,000 gallons of usage, going up by about $5, less than 1%. Now, a 2-inch meter customer of this type is going to see the biggest impact you see on the water base rate. They're currently getting charged about $287 to have a 2-inch meter. Going forward, that's going to drop down to $106, which is the biggest real change that you're seeing as far as a decrease. Why this is only $5 a month and less than 1%. And then finally, you have that large commercial user, both combining the water and the wastewater. Here you're seeing an increase of about 90%, so almost doubling that bill for a high water user. So our next steps, we have to take council action based on the state statute. We have to take council action on a notice of intent to increase our utility fees. We're looking to do that on the 3rd of February. There's a 60-day notice period that's required as part of that notice. Following that, on April 7th, we will then take action on adopting the actual rates. And then finally, on the May 13th would be the first billing cycle that these rates would take place, that they would be in place. The future increases then would be on the calendar year like we have done in the past. But because of all of the extra steps we took with the outreach, we wanted to get all of that input in before we made changes for this year. So with that, we do have a guest with us, Chair from our Citizen Water and Wastewater Rates Committee.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Council and the Mayor for having the foresight and wisdom to understand that we need to have a structure for how we move forward with water and wastewater rates. To sit back and wait for something to happen only invites disaster. So the committee, I think, was a good start. I want to thank you personally for appointing me and allowing me to be part of it. Second thing I want to say is, everybody, we're going to turn off the screen, take out a piece of paper and a pen, because we're going to have a quiz, and on it you're going to give us the rates for all of the meters for wastewater and water for 26 through 29, starting now.
I can't even do that.
If you can tell me,
You've only got,
if you can tell me what it's gonna cost to wash my car now.
no, it's not going to take long. You've only got 15 minutes to do all of that. So, just so you understand that. I'll be very brief. I think what we have here is a need assessment as to why we need to do this. And really, it comes down to something very basic, very simple. And just look at what we were cost-wise in 2012, 2013, where we are in 2025, 26. And just to give you a few examples of the costs involved with the water wastewater department, where they've been and where we are. You know where we are. We've gone up $3.05 over the past now 13 years. However, chemicals have gone up 350% approximately. Electricity has gone up over 200%. Personnel has gone up over 250%. Those are costs that have had to have been absorbed by what we had in our fund balance at that point. Obviously, we can't continue to draw from the fund balance and have a fund balance. What we need to do is assure that we do have the fund balance, and at the same time treat our citizens, our homeowners, our taxpayers in a way that they can understand why it needs to be done and what needs to be done. I think what has been presented to you and what was recommended, and just so you understand, this is the material that was given to us by the Water Wastewater Department. There's a lot here to absorb, which we tried to do. No pun intended when I say absorb when we're talking about water. There's a lot of information here, all of which was expertly explained. Every question that we asked was answered. Every concern that we had was addressed. We listened to, we saw, we evaluated, we continued to think about, and over the course of it came up with the recommendations, 5-year term rather than 4-year term, but the difference there is very insignificant. it is our opinion unanimously of the Wastewater Committee that in fact what is being offered to you as prudent for the city is indeed the best, the soundest, and the most prudent fiscal decision you can make with respect to that, to do two things: to produce quality water and to deliver it effectively and efficiently. You know, there's an old saying that says, people are our most valuable asset, and I believe that, except you've got to have a little bit of a qualification with respect to what we're doing here today and what we've done over the past few months. Water is actually our most important asset, because without water here, there won't be any people. So I want to thank you again for allowing me to be part of this. I'm very pleased to have been in that, and I want to do an aside. I've been on 2 committees now. I was on the Go Pond committee as well as this committee. I've dealt with other city departments, and without reservation, and I'm not saying this to blow smoke figuratively, wherever you want it to go. I'm saying this with 50 years of public service and 50 years of governmental experience. This is the best community, people-wise, that I have ever seen by far. You ought to be proud of yourselves. I haven't found a person yet that has been disrespectful, uncooperative, unable to answer questions, or if they can't give me an immediate answer, they won't get you one as quickly as they can. You ought to be proud of what you have here. I'm proud to live here, and I'm proud to be part of this. So thank you all.
Thank you, Jim. With that, Mayor, Council, happy to, any questions?
You'll have 10 minutes left on your quiz.
Thank you. Let's go to Vice Mayor first. I know you've got some questions, so take it away.
I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes.
So I was taking notes during the presentation, so kind of bear with me. We're going to go back a little bit. I think the asset management slide, I think it was number 15. And just as a note for future, if we could number the slides, that'd be great. I think, Jared, you made a comment about using capital funds versus O&M for replacements. Is that, go back one more slide. There. They use capital funds versus O&M funds for replacements. Is that simply like a dollar threshold decision, or is it just a budget choice where those funds come from?
I would say it's probably a little bit of both. So that both funds have some repair replacement dollars in their operating funds. But the majority of the money, especially on the wastewater side, is coming from, when I say capital, think of it as it's coming from fund balance. It's coming from one-time sources of revenue, whether that's issuing debt or fund balance. So I would say it's somewhat a choice driven by the revenues that we have. So we don't have the revenues to make it an operating item, so we pay for it with capital. So it is a decision, but it's driven by the operating revenue we have available.
So it's not, if a pump costs us $10,000, we capitalize that, but if we get another pump that's $5,000, that's O&M.
Yeah, so the accounting rules on what gets capitalized is a little bit outside of what this conversation is, because
okay.
think of it more
That
as
clears it up.
think of it more as the operating budget versus one-time budget. So it's either being covered with ongoing funds or it's being covered with one-time funds, which is usually fund balance or debt service, and it comes down to whether or not we have the operating funds to do it or not. The accountants make their decisions on what gets capitalized kind of after the fact, so to speak.
All right, thank you for that. And then skip forward, I think it was slide 20, where we talk about the global connections. Yeah, and then there was another comment, I don't know if it was you or Jared, but if I understood it correctly, are we in arrears at collecting those connection fees?
We're not,
Are we
yeah,
up to date? I'm sorry?
we're not in arrears. We have just come across situations where we have not been able to collect them because of prior agreements that were in place. So there's not an outstanding bill, so to speak, for this.
So are those fees then just lost?
We-
Are we gonna be able to capture those?
I would say in most cases, I'd say almost all of those, I'm not aware of anything that we are going to try to go back and collect on. Essentially, going forward, anybody that comes in the door, though, we're gonna make sure that we are charging them this fee and make them show us why we can't.
Okay. Do we have an estimate on a dollar amount that we were unable to collect?
We could get that information. I don't have that in front of me, but we could get that information.
Okay, thanks. I'd appreciate that. And then, last question, kind of flip forward again to where we were comparing with other cities, the rates.
Should be right after the impact slides.
Yeah, right there. So everybody that's to the left of us, have they done a rate study recently? And if so, or, where are they at in the rate study process? Is it, are we gonna be always in the middle, or is Avondale gonna jump ahead of us because their rates are gonna get raised?
We can get the exact dates. I know Avondale is in the middle of they have a 3-year plan that they're in the middle of. Surprise recently, I believe back in the summer, adopted theirs. Goodyear just adopted theirs back in December. I'm not sure on Peoria and Glendale. But
Okay.
I would not expect to see an Avondale jump up to where we're at. And that kind of goes back to the slide that Terry had mentioned about why we're different from we can be different from other cities or other utilities. So I would not expect to see an Avondale jump up because they have a much different cost structure and also where they can get water from is a little bit different than us, and they're a smaller utility than we are.
Yeah, no, I understand. I just didn't, this is obviously a snapshot in time. And I just picked Avondale as the far left example on the chart, not politically, but if they're doing a rate study, how are their rates going to get adjusted, and where does that put them on this comparison chart? But you answered my question, so that's all I have, Mayor. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor. Questions? Not seeing any. It's really important to hit home on the point you're making right here. And actually, maybe a question on this. Is that Buckeye recommended rate, is that the ultimate rate after 4 years, or is that the rate this next year?
That's the rate next year. So we're showing the impact, the immediate impact that the rate plan will have.
So we'll continue to, assuming all stays equal, likely move right if Liberty, Upcore, and Goodyear stay exactly where they're at.
We do know that when Goodyear adopted their plan, theirs is a multiple year plan with increases each year as well.
Okay.
So I would not expect that we're going to pass Goodyear during this rate plan.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Liberty also has an application in with the ACC right now.
Okay. And as you're talking about it previously, some of the reasons that, say, a Buckeye would be more than an Avondale, one, where they get their water from, but two, they're a municipality that's grown in these concentric circles, and generally cities have, so where you have an extension of a line instead of a complete new operating system, both water and wastewater. So if you take the way we're spread out across the city of Buckeye, there's both of those plants that exist in Sundance, both of those plants that exist in Tartesso, both of those that exist in Festival, and it's spread out and a lot less efficient than a city that is much smaller with a plant, a water and a wastewater treatment plant that's just extending pipe infrastructure to get out. So it's important that we look at this and compare ourselves to our neighboring cities, but it's also really important that we put it all in context, especially for our public, so that they understand what the differences are in water rates. You made a comment, I really appreciate you keeping us out of junk bond territory. That's good. I'm glad you're here. There was the slide that you had shown at the end that showed the entire bill and increases and decreases on, and actually maybe go to commercial 2-inch. I think it's 2 over. That one there. So the water base currently is 287. That's going to drop to 106, and then the consumption, which is the per unit cost at times 20,000 units, is going from 161 up to 239, and that incentivizes conservation. And there's, I guess, there's all the data, you guys are churning through this, and there's rate design, and we're trying to get a certain effect out of the rate design. But at the same time, you want just a nice level revenue coming in that is gradually increasing as we increase as a utility. Why do we, in this case, go away from that nice gradual, it is a set fee, we know that each month we're going to get a check sent for at least the water base, and switch to the water consumption model, to where it's that we're getting a lot less of that steady revenue coming in, and it's more of the consumption. It's really all based on consumption for the, what's the part of that?
So part of it is when we talked about customer fairness also, and the example we used was the split of the commercial and residential revenue, but it extends to other things. So in this case, when we were looking at the water base fee, and we had a different 1-inch base fee for residential than we did commercial. So part of what we're doing is we're consolidating to one single meter table, and in doing that, we're looking at kind of what's the average customer look like, and that's residential makes up the majority of our bills. So we're keying it off of the residential usage, and a 1-inch meter can take as much water whether it's a commercial or it's a residential. So in consolidating those tables into one table, in the idea of customer fairness, that brought that water base fee down, is what it did. And then the consumption side of it is essentially we're looking to drive conservation. But that's why we're still looking to recover in total 33% of our revenues for water from the base fee. And we're still going to be able to accomplish that with the fees that we're setting up. That's what our target was there. And then on the consumption side, it's looking to drive some conservation.
Okay. And there's probably 100 different ways to come up with this and trying to determine what's right. And it's policy decisions that you all are recommending that we're enacting that force a certain behavior on the side of the water users. So it's just interesting to get the backstory on some of those. And I can appreciate trying to normalize some of this stuff so it's not commercial way up here and residential here, and you bring that more in line with one another, and costs are what they are. You spread that out amongst everybody as even as you can.
Right.
Okay. And I'm understanding also that in lieu of a 5-year plan, we're doing a 4-year plan. Either way, it's the same overall increase. Is that correct?
Correct. So it'll be, so the rate changes will all take effect, and that's where you're seeing the different percentage increases in fiscal year, in this 26. Then the increases that happen after that, for the next 3 years, They're all for water, everybody's 4.25%, and for wastewater, it's 7% across the board.
And bad mayor math on the fly here, but if we did stretch that out to 5 years, it would be 5.6% instead of 7. You're talking a 1.5% increase, or less in increase, or a 3.4 versus 4.25.
But if we stretched it out another year, then we'd be looking at another year's worth of expenditures.
Yes.
And it would just be 5 years at 7%. It wouldn't be that we would take this increase and stretch it out.
Okay.
We would continue, essentially in the model for this idea of gradualism, we looked across 8 years, and we said, what rate is going to be a consistent rate we can apply across all 8 years? And that rate was, in the case of wastewater, was 7%. But then we go back and we look at some of those metrics and we say, hey, we start dropping way down on our operating surplus, our fund balance is declining, and we're looking at that coverage ratio. And we go, this is a good time for us to look at this again. Let's just stretch this out to 4 years. At that point, we don't know if we still would be able to maintain a 4.25% rate, or it might be something completely different. If we change when we issue the debt service, there are all sorts of variables at play, and we really feel like 4 years is a good point based on those metrics that we see to take another look at this.
Okay. Harquahala water purchase, is that factored into this, or is that completely separate?
So the Harquahala water purchase was done from the general fund.
Okay.
So the general fund purchased that. In the 5-year horizon that we're looking at, we don't include that as being something that comes into play. Another reason why a 4 year is probably a little bit better, because then we get a better idea of what's happening with the water portfolio purchases that we're programming, and whether or not Harquahala, if something comes more immediate on that, something that we can plan for. But at this point, it sits on the outside of this model.
Okay. I appreciate what you all looked at it, you sent it all through the Water Rate Advisory Committee, and is that Water and Wastewater Rate Advisory Committee, or
We truncated.
the WRAC?
Well, that's why we truncated.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Marketing was
Yeah.
gonna workshop that. But really appreciate y'all taking a second look at this and making sure that we have these right-sized for the future. And Jim, a huge thank you to you and the entire committee that put in a lot of time sitting in meetings that sounded exactly like this, going over all of the data for all these eye charts that Water has put up for us. Really grateful for your participation in this and on the bond committee.
That was fun too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to see big fruit from both of these. So really appreciate the time and the presentation, and we'll look forward to the third, where we discuss the notice of intent to increase. Okay. All right. Anything else? Councilmember.
That last percentage, that is a 0.7%, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, because that number otherwise would be 46, if I'm not mistaken.
It's that increase for that customer there, because of kind of how we walked through that change on that base rate in water, they would have a $4.64 monthly increase is what they would see, which is 0.7%.
0.7%,
Correct.
not 7%.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
But that's a commercial customer with a 2-inch meter using 20,000 gallons. That sounds like my house, actually. Feels like sometimes. It's not really, but. Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you all very much. Item number 3, with nothing else on the agenda, we are adjourned.